So my name's Pat Younge, and I'm going to be talking to Saurabh over the next hour. First thing I'm going to tell you is that we want questions. There will be time at the end, but we're happy to take questions all the way through. And I have a policy of just pointing at people and asking them for a question. So always have a question ready, because you never know.
When you ask me questions.
I'm going to point at you first.
That's scary.
And quite often, but occasionally I'm going to point at people out there. So always have a question ready. Second thing, just to introduce myself. So my name's Pat Younge. I now run my own consultancy. My last job was head of in-house production for the BBC, where I was in charge of in-house comedy, entertainment, drama and factual, which is about 3,000 people doing EastEnders, Holby, Casualty, Doctor Who, Citizen Khan, Miranda, natural history, a whole range of stuff. Prior to that, I ran an American cable network called Travel Channel Media, which was the creator of Man vs. Food, amongst other things. And I've worked at the BBC, ITV and Channel 4. I went to a state school in Stevenage in Hertfordshire. I studied mining geology at Cardiff University. Saurabh, where did you go to school? What did you study? What brings you here?
I went to school in Guildford. I went to Guildford Grammar School, which was fine, and I ended up going to Cambridge to study chemical engineering, which I find very useful in my day-to-day job.
So the transition from chemical engineering to comedy, just talk us through it.
I don't know if any of you have ever been to a chemical plant, but they're deeply unpleasant places. They smell, and pretty much everything you touch will either give you cancer or burn a hole in you, or both. So I genuinely couldn't wait to get out. And also I was 21 and I wanted to hang around in places where there were girls. And the engineering world are so shallow and shit motivation to do anything. But the engineering world is very, very male dominated, and it just, the whole balance has all felt wrong. But, you know, it was great. I had a lovely time. ICI were very nice to me, and they were very sweet when I left. I answered an ad in The Guardian to start.
So the job was advertised. What did they advertise for?
Yeah,
Funny person.
It was a weird advert that said something like enthusiastic young person required to start live comedy production thing. And I'd done a bit of that at university. I'd tried being funny and realised that I wasn't. So
when you say tried, you tried stand-up? Or?
Yeah, I was a deeply average stand-up comic, and I mean beyond average, and it was fine, but you know I'm never going to do that.
Any University Comedy Club people here? Put your hands up. I'm not going to ask you a question. I just want to know. So this is a free hands up. Okay. So I didn't join the comedy club, but like you, mining geology was not where certainly people with opposite gender were, and I ended up in media. So there was an advert in The Guardian, or which newspaper?
In The Guardian?
In The Guardian, yeah. My advert was in The Guardian as well. This is in the old days when they used to advertise jobs in newspapers, because now it's who you know and tracking the company website. So you answered the advert. Was there an interview?
Yeah, there was. There was an interview where the guy interviewing me took me out to some cafe to interview me and immediately said hello to one of his oldest friends, who was Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and was my absolute hero. And I thought, this is brilliant. I haven't even got this job and I've met my hero, so it's only going to get better than this. So yeah, I answered the ad, got interviewed, got the job, and produced
where was
live
that job?
comedy. It was at a company called, it was sort of a company that was half owned by a large agency called, at the time, ICM, they're now called Independent. They're a huge global talent agency, and it was half owned by them and half owned by a large theatrical producer called Polar Jones, who produced sort of big West End theatre hits and big tours. And it was to produce live comedy shows, so I did that for 5 or 6 years, and that went very well.
And what's the reality of that life? Are you on the road all the time? Or
sort of, yeah. I mean, we produced a lot of shows up in Edinburgh, and so a lot of it's out in comedy clubs, because part of our job was to discover new talent to take up there. So we spent a lot of time looking for new talent. So we broke, I mean, I won't take any credit for it because they were all brilliant, we just gave them a platform, but we were around and helped break people like Matt Lucas and David Walliams and League of Gentlemen and Bill Bailey and Dylan Moran and Armstrong and Miller and a variety of other people who sort of we found doing nothing and took up to Edinburgh, and then we get them to a certain stage and then we tour them around the country and occasionally take them to the West End. So I didn't break Eddie Izzard. I worked with Eddie for a couple of years, but did shows with Eddie and Barry Humphries as Dame Edna Everage, and a variety of other big tours. So it was pretty relentless.
And the lifestyle, it's not 9 to 5.
No, it's preposterous. So you're out until 2 in the morning. So often you're not getting back from a gig till 2 in the morning, and then you're in the office at 9 o'clock. So it was relentless.
And how many years ago was that?
I was a young man.
You started very young, obviously.
So I started doing that at 22, and I finished it in 98. I stopped doing that in 1998, 99, and I started to work in telly about then.
And so how long have you been in telly since then?
15 years, Christ.
And
yeah.
how much different is the lifestyle now to then? So it wasn't a 9 to 5 then. Are you in a more 9 to 5 now?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. I think production, when you're actually making television shows, is as relentless as live work, because you're usually on set at 7 and you don't finish till 7 or 8, and you've always got either rushes to watch in the evening or scripts to sort out or issues to do. So it's sort of 15, 16-hour days every day, and you don't get much time off. So it's as relentless. Once you get out of physical production, it sort of almost goes back to being a day job, but it's not. The hours are still ridiculous.
That's after you've been sick at the end of the production because you're so tired.
Yeah.
And that relentlessness of life in production is just one of those things to take into account. When you are producing, because budgets are tighter, timelines are tighter, these are, whether it's drama or comedy or documentary, it's 15, 16-hour days for very intense periods.
It's fun, but it's long.
Yeah.
It's very entertaining, otherwise none of us would stick with it.
So introduce your first clip, which is the fattest man in Britain.
Okay, so this is a show that I made when I was running the comedy department at what is now ITV Studios, and it's written by two brilliant people, by Caroline Aherne, who created The Royal Family, and she's
Mrs.
a genius, and Mrs. Merton, she's a genius, and Jeff Pope, who was a colleague of mine, who's a brilliant writer and wrote Philomena, that won the Oscar-nominated last year, and wrote Scylla, the Cilla Black thing was on recently, and is a brilliant journalist and creator of factual drama. So this is a show that we made that was based on a true story, and it's about a guy called Georgie Godwin, who's played by Tim Spall, who's amazing, in a brilliant fat suit. And he's a guy whose life is about being the fattest man in Britain. And he eats and eats and eats and has got himself to this size. And the two other people in this clip are Francis Barbara, who's his sort of friend and carer, and Bobby Ball, who plays his manager, Maurice Morrissey, who drives a local taxi firm. And in this clip, his big rival for the fattest man in Britain has just died. Just watch them.
That's funny.
Teas and sandwiches were in order today at the Burnley funeral of Britain's...
Is it on yet?
Just starting.
Tommy Two-Ton at Stafford.
There she is.
It was the heavy
Linda Lasardi of Chapel Street.
Richard Barter was there.
You not missed anything?
You'll have one of these, won't you, Georgie?
No, not
Shut
me.
up, will ya?
He hasn't seen many send-offs quite like this one. As you can see, behind me are hundreds of mourners, all here to say goodbye to one of the region's most colourful figures, Tommy Two-Ton Stafford.
There I am, look! That's me! Yes, look, you can see me Bluetooth!
No way!
A former dinner lady. And adding a touch of celebrity to the proceedings, amongst the condolence cards was one believed to have been from comedian Stan Boardman.
Oh, Stan Boardman.
Tommy rose from obscurity to eat his way into the record books as becoming Britain's biggest.
Well, that's bollocks.
At his peak, he was believed to have weighed in excess of 50 stones.
Bollocks.
Tommy was a giant of a man.
Bollocks.
Who was also known for having a giant heart, which, sadly, gave out last Tuesday. Claire.
When I were at GK Morley's on Ashcroft Road and they weighed me on the thing, what they weighed the vans on, I was 53.5 stone.
Yeah, but that was over 20 years
And
ago,
there were Cliffy
Georgie.
Proudfoot there, Shaky Dave and Eileen Upcock from the canteen with the raised shoe, and they'll verify that. Well, with the exception of Cliffy Proudfoot, who's since expired, but there's nothing I can do about
What are you
that.
getting all worked up about? Come on, Georgie. You're number one now. No question.
I just don't like lies. And R.I.P. and all that. But it were all girth with Tommy. With me, you get the density. God rest his soul, but Tommy Stafford was an out-and-out con artist. That Should have been my funeral.
It's,
Hell of a project.
yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it's sort of more comedy drama than out-and-out comedy, but it was an amazing thing to do and to work with actors like Tim, who's, I mean, astonishing. And I think he's in a film that's out at the moment, Mr. Turner, where he plays the great artist, J.W. Turner. And it's sort of amazing working with someone like that all day. I think what's really interesting about that clip is the reason I'm in comedy, the reason I'm in television is I like working with talents, I like working with hugely talented people, and that's a sort of, that combination of people, of Caroline and Jeff and Tim and a brilliant director, David Blair, was quite astonishing to be around. And actually it was despite the fact that it was hugely problematic and really difficult to do, and the hours were long, and Tim had to be, it took him 4 hours every day to get in and out of that makeup and fat suit. And it was complicated and difficult. Despite all of that, it was worth the hours because you get to work with those extraordinary people.
What was it like working with two writers? I mean, how did you find that as a process? Because Jeff's an experienced producer, he sort of produces himself, so it didn't take a lot of, like all pairs of writers, they have their ups and downs, but they work very complementarily in that Caroline is full of amazing dialogue and fantastic ideas, and Jeff's all structure and rigour. And the two of them, she would flit around and talk about conversations she's overheard in a butcher's or down the shop, which would all be gold dust, and Jeff would find a way of putting that into a structure. They worked really, really well together. It was a real. Every draft that came in was fantastic and funnier than the last, which is not always the case when you're working with writers who often rewrite and make things worse. They rewrote and made things better every time. I'm not being very interesting, but I haven't told you any jokes. Zai set me up, unfortunately, to tell you jokes. But Sure, there'll be a joke somewhere along the line.
There'll be no jokes.
So, you said there that this was comedy drama. Just to explain to people the different forms of comedy. I mean, because actually one of the things I discovered when I took over production was that it's actually one comedy department. It's like 3 or 4 sub-departments.
I think comedy's an interesting thing because at one end, you've got it's very hard to divide it into discrete bundles. You're better off looking at it as a sliding scale, and at one end is big, broad, out-and-out, balls-out comedy, Mrs. Brown, Miranda, whatever you want. And at the other end is probably drama with jokes. There is quite a lot of, especially the American drama that's coming through now is, Breaking Bad is packed full of gags. The Walking Dead has jokes in it. I mean, not many, but it's got some, mostly involving people having their heads ripped off. But somewhere along that scale is everything. And we don't deal with something that's a discrete thing to drama. We just deal with all the stuff that's at this end. And sometimes the lines are a bit blurred. So something like Fattest Man fitted sort of right into a sort of somewhere in the middle. It had loads of jokes in it, and its provenance was out of a comedy department, and the writers have a great comedy pedigree, but it worked very much as a drama and was really moving at the end.
And in terms of other forms of comedy, sketch, what would you say the health of sketch is at the moment?
Oh, that's a question. Sketch shows are really hard to do.
Why?
Because, well, if you think about what makes you want to turn a television show on over and over again, it's often characters. You want to watch Miranda because you like Miranda's character and you like the relationship she has with Stevie, or pick any other sitcom, whether it's the IT Crowd or whatever it is. You engage with characters, which is why the viewing figures for comedy often go up from the start. Inbetweeners was a great example of a show that started off with a very small audience that built and built and built because people wanted to engage with those characters. It's very hard to get people to engage with the show. So if you look at sketch show as being some which are very character-based, like Little Britain, and some which are just discrete sketches, like something like Cardinal Burns, which is a brilliant show and really well made, it's very hard to engage with Cardinal Burns because you don't have that many characters to engage with, and there are some, and they're brilliantly done. Little Britain was easier to engage with, but it's very, again, if you're having lots of discrete characters and you're not telling a story, you have to get most of them right, as they or Catherine Tate did. Once you start, it's very easy as a viewer to go, oh, I don't like this character, I'm going to turn over. I'm going to watch something else.
Impression shows?
Yeah. I don't know.
You're going to work for this?
I don't know. I mean, everyone does impressions now. Is it?
It's not on TV though.
But is it? I think
comes in waves, maybe.
In the dim and distant part. I mean, look, there are brilliant impressionists out there. There's some really fantastic voice people, Lewis MacLeod, and but it's sort of on TV. On radio, it works fine because you're doing a voice. On TV, you now have a situation where it's no longer as impressive to sound like someone and not look as much like them as they might do. It might have been impressive 20 years ago, but it's sort of not as impressive now. I'm not sure unless one of you lot can find, in which case come and talk to me afterwards immediately. I'll take 40%. Unless one of you's got an amazing idea for how to reinvent the impression show, I'm not sure there is one. But yeah, who knows? Someone will prove me wrong, I'm sure.
Okay, let's talk about your second clip, which is White Van Man.
Okay, so I used to. This is an interesting example. It's a show that ran that Zai, when he was running BBC Three, had on his channel. It was originally commissioned by his predecessor, Danny Cohen, who now runs all of telly at the BBC. And then Zai ran the second series. So ran for 2 series on BBC Three. Its first series was the most watched show they'd had on the channel at the time. The most watched comedy show they'd had on the channel. Second series did not quite as well, but still did pretty well. And I was disappointed it didn't run for the third one, but that's what happens with these things. It was an interesting idea in that it was a show that came out of a long conversation that we had internally with my team about how a lot of British comedy was very similar. It all seemed quite. It all seemed to have a very similar provenance. It was all quite middle class. It was all set very similarly. The characters all felt quite cynical. They reflected the rather narrow band of writers that we possibly have to work with. And so we made an effort to say, let's try and work with different voices and different ideas. And the guy who wrote this was a stand-up who'd never written before, was a guy called Adrian Poynton, who's, I think his dad or his uncle had worked had basically worked out of a white van, done handyman jobs. And his background isn't massively different, Adrian's, but it was a slightly different voice. It felt like a world that hadn't been massively explored. And the demographics of the show, I don't really know what demographics are, the people who watched it was very different to a lot of TV comedy audiences, which are often aimed at the same place. Anyway, it did really well. We were very proud of it. It didn't win any awards because everyone's a bastard. But it was good.
Middle-class judges, you think?
Well, I don't know. Look, we liked it. The response that we got on what was, I think, quite a nascent Twitter was rather amazing, in that we didn't expect to get the feedback we got, but there was a lot of there's nothing for me on the telly, but this is right up my street, and it felt good to be pitting an audience that isn't necessarily catered for. Okay. It's a small clip. It's quite hard when you're trying to pick clips of sitcoms. It's quite hard to pick things that work.
Stop apologising.
Discreet, but it's all right.
Can't keep doing this, Coming to the office all hungover.
Office?
Yeah, work. A day at the office. That's what people call it.
That's what people who work in offices call it.
Had a tough day at the office? Never heard that?
Yeah, I've had loads of people say it. They all worked in offices.
Just a common phrase, Darren.
You're just obsessed. Wasn't your restaurant idea an office thing?
Yeah, the toast office. It's not going to happen now, though, is it?
Yeah, well, good, because it would break your dad's heart. She's pretty fit, though, isn't she?
She's massively out of your league.
No, she's not. We're both 9s.
You're both... You're a low 7 at best.
Oh, thought about it then, have you?
No.
No, you said it. Can't take it back now. You think I'm a 7.
A low 7?
Doesn't matter. It's out there. You want me, and I'm sorry to say, but as a low 7, 4 points out of your league.
Grow up.
Sexual harassment in the workplace, that is. Checking me out whilst I do my job. Why is there a suit in the back of the van? You don't actually think this is an office, do you?
It's my dad's. Took it back from the dry cleaners.
They have some pimp lapels.
Yeah, I know. They bought it in '78. One good suit to last you your whole life, son.
Jesus.
Yeah, I know.
Darren? I've rustled us up some coffee and croissants.
OK. I'm just helping here. There's a lot of stuff to carry.
OK, well, don't be too long.
I won't.
What's that about?
So what I should have said is Joel Fry's character, Darren, he's now in Plebs and Game of Thrones and stuff, has just woken up, having gone on a big night out. He's woken up in that woman's house, and is wearing her shirt, as you can see. And as he leaves the house, his business partner, or his boss, turns up, and he realises he's accidentally slept with a person whose house he's supposed to be working in. But he's also told her he's a lawyer, so he has to then go through the rest of the day pretending to do his job with his boss, while also pretending to her that he's a lawyer. And hilarity ensues. All kinds of funny shizzle happens. There you go.
You talked about this working class comedy idea, which is, I know, something Danny Cohen, who runs BBC Television, has made quite a couple of big pronouncements about the absence or the lack of genuinely working class comedy. What does he mean by that? Deconstruct that for us.
I think it's quite. Danny makes a very, very good point, but I think it's quite easy to take a headline from that, which isn't quite right. Which is looking for working class comedy, which I don't think is right, and I don't think that's what Danny was saying. It's quite easy. It's quite hard to make. Sorry, it's quite easy to make comedy exclusive, and it's hard, and and we all want to make it inclusive. You want the most people watching your show that you can have, and sometimes comedy writers who are from a particular world and often have particular educational background or whatever, will find themselves going, well, that's the obvious joke, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do the next joke that's slightly less obvious. I'm going to do that joke because that makes me really clever. And what that can be is quite excluding. I find that quite excluding watching it, and I know friends of mine do as well. It can make you think, oh, hang on a minute, you're just trying to be smart rather than trying to be funny. That doesn't happen all the time, but when you hit a show which has broad appeal, like In-Betweeners, for example, which has massively broad appeal, but is still a very smart, sophisticated, well-constructed, well-plotted show. What that show has is complete accessibility, because they've said, that's the joke, we're going to do it, I'm going to do it really well. And I think sometimes it's quite easy to try and overthink comedies, try and make it feel almost like trying to preach to the choir, trying to make your mates think that you've done something uber clever, when actually you forget. It's easy for writers, and I'm not blaming writers, producers do this, we all do this, is you sometimes forget that you're trying to entertain an audience who doesn't necessarily spend all their time thinking about jokes and therefore hasn't already got past joke 3. That's a very long-winded answer to a very simple
but we used to
question.
spend a lot of time, myself and Mark and yourself, trying to, BBC One was always the thing we wanted to crack for comedy. And then you get something like Mrs. Brown. Anybody seen Mrs. Brown's Boys? Put your hands up if you've seen it. Leave your hand up if you like it. See, I mean, about 2/3 of the hands went down. I love it. I think it's incredibly clever, incredibly smart, and incredibly straightforward and obvious. He's going to do it, he's going to do it, he's going to do it. Oh, God, he's done it, and then he tells you that he's just done it. And that's why it works.
But there's a really interesting, years ago, I'm sure it was the CIA that did this, because it's the kind of thing they used to do. There was somebody in the States did an experiment where they strapped people into a chair and wouldn't let them get up, and got them to watch drama shows on a loop, the same 3 shows on a loop for hours and hours and hours. And then they got them to watch the same 3 comedy shows on a loop for hours and hours. And the people watching drama were suicidal after about a day, and the people watching comedy were enjoying it more because they knew the joke was coming. And actually there's something delicious, I'm sure you all feel this, when you sort of know there's a joke coming, you think, oh, it's going to do it, it's going to do it, oh, I did it. And there's nothing wrong in that. There are points in, a lot of comedy is surprise, and Miranda's a brilliant example of a big populist show that also can be very surprising. But also there are bits of it that are exactly what you would expect them to be, and they're brilliant for it, because you think, I know what's going to happen here. I know that she's going to make a mess of this situation because that's what she does. Brilliant, I look forward to that.
All I don't know is how.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And but you know what's coming, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, we do, all of us have a tendency to try and overthink or over-intellectualise the comedy we're doing, going, oh, I can't do that because the audience will know that. Well, yeah, but they like it.
Miranda was a stand-up who came to TV. Sure. How much, somebody was telling me about the amount of stand-ups, they say, work for a long time to get a set together, and then they tour it for a whole year. Yeah. Then they take it to television, and within 6 weeks, all that material is used up. What is that burn rate like for stand-ups and people who come across? What, from stand-up into TV? It's a different world. It's a slightly fascinating thing, this whole stand-up sitcom balance. I don't know why I'm doing this. Balancing. Balancing.
it used to be that stand-ups came into television to make money, whereas actually all the money's in stand-up at the moment. I'm sure there'll be some cycle where it'll go back into television. But if you were a stand-up comic and you can make millions touring the country with a set that you've probably spent a year writing, and then you can take that 1 hour of material, which is carefully crafted and honed, and by God, these people are good. You can take that around the country and make yourself several £1 million, or you can earn a lot less than that writing 3 hours of comedy for television, which then is gone, and that's done. And that's hard to get across, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's tricky to get people to make that leap. In the States, where the money in television is extraordinary, and sort of by a factor of 100 greater than it is in the UK, the big upside, it's more attractive for stand-ups. People like Ray Romano, who created Everybody Loves Raymond, and other people like that, who had stand-up careers and were doing fine. It was a very attractive thing to try and push yourself into TV. And Chris Rock's just done another sitcom. It's a sitcom or a movie? Anyway, so it's attractive even for the big people. The Amy Poehler's and Tina Fey's, who I know weren't stand-ups, but they started off in live comedy to come into television, because that's where the cash is.
You sold White Van Man to the States, or
yeah,
a
we
version
did.
thereof.
Yeah, they made ABC. It's quite a well-trodden path. It usually ends in disaster for British sitcoms to go out to the States. There's an amazing. It's amazing. I don't know if you can find it online, but if you can, there's an amazing version of Peep Show where someone in the States bought Peep Show and they remade it without the POV and made them really handsome and successcul, living in a really big flat. So what have you bought? I mean, what's the show? So mostly these end in disaster. But we sold White Van Man to ABC Studios, who commissioned a script, and then they commissioned a pilot. And normally, in the States, the fall-off is extraordinary. They commission hundreds of scripts and make 6 pilots and probably commission 1 of those. And it got commissioned and got picked up. And we were all going, this is extraordinary. And, the Americans were going to make a long series, and Adrian, the writer, went out to be on the writing team. And then they sacked the lead writer in the summer during prep as they were crewing up their writing staff, because they have much bigger staffs in the States, and they run with a team of 10, 12 people. They sacked the main writer, and then they decided that the show was so behind that they weren't going to be able to show it when they were going to, so it got pulled out of the schedule and then started in January, and by this time all the momentum had gone. And they made 13 eps, which are pretty good, actually. They're not bad. They're a little confused, but they're not bad.
And what's it called out there? Can you remember?
It's called The Family Tools.
Okay.
I don't know if the word tool means something different in the States the way it does here, but it was only ever the English people in the room that sniggered when they mentioned it. So maybe we just all have terribly childish senses of humour. Okay,
I'm going to come out for a question. Who's got a question? Somebody at the back there. Just wait for the microphone. The lady just there at the back.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you talk a little bit about the commissioning process? So, how you're looking at, what are you thinking about in terms of what you're going to develop? How much money do you have to spend on development? And also, how are you using the net? I mean, the web. Are you looking at sitcoms online? Are you looking at talent online? Where are you finding your kind of up-and-coming talent?
Okay,
that's about 8 questions.
Yeah.
So
Can you answer all of them, please?
Do question 1, which is on development, and we'll pick up the web. We'll pick up the web later on. There are another question, so we'll take 2 together. Was another question over here? Yeah, gentleman here.
I'll answer that. Can I answer that one first?
That one while this
So there's development's an interesting thing in comedy. I think it's very different in factual. And so when you speak to Andrew, if you're all here for Andrew later, he'll have a very different take on this, and that's right, because factual works very differently. In my job, the most important thing to remember for us is that we're not the talent. It's not our job to be funny. It's not our job to think up great ideas. It's our job to go and talk to talented people, writers, stand-ups, whoever, and say, let's talk about what you want to do. Let's try and hone it and focus it and get it into a state using the skills we have in structure and understanding how scripts work and understanding how to make shows, and trying to nudge people in a direction, as opposed to saying, this is what we're doing. So we don't sit around saying we should have a sitcom about teachers in a failing school where one of them is a secret billionaire. We don't do that. We don't do that stuff. What we tend to do is have vague ideas in our heads about what is missing in the British TV landscape, what we think from our experience of watching a lot of other genres of television, of talking to people, of watching theatre, what the general feeling is in the air. And so when you have a writer who says, I've got this idea about X, and you think, actually, if you made it a little bit more like this, I think that's an amazing thing, and if they buy it, great. So our development process is very, very focused towards writers and trying to enable them. We're enablers rather than talent. In factual, the people who make the shows are the talent, and they're amazing.
And at what stage do you engage with commissioning?
So we engage with commissioning at the time when it's best, which is a very vague thing to say, but it's not an exact science. So there are times when I'm going for a drink with the commissioner tonight, and it's a social thing, we get on well, and at some point during the evening, he'll say something that will trigger something in my head, and I have to then work out, do I pitch him this idea in a bar, or do I wait until such time as I've got something? But everything that we do is sales. You're trying to sell your show to a commissioner who's going to give you a lot of money to make it, and television's expensive to make. The Fattest Man in Britain cost nearly £1 million to make. White Van Man cost 1.6 million or something like that, maybe a bit less than that, 1.4 million. So for a series, so they're expensive shows. So first we have to sell it to a commissioner and a channel, and then you're trying to sell it to an audience. You want your audience to engage with what you're doing. So that sales process is complicated and it's varied, and it depends. It's sometimes about listening and thinking, actually, you said you want this, and I think this could feel a little like that. So if I reframe the way we sell this, then maybe that'll fit the gap that you've got. And sometimes it's just about being really passionate about what you have. And, we have in the past wandered into commissioners saying, this is the best script you'll ever read, you have to do this. And sometimes they hate you and say, well, I'll be the judge of that. And sometimes they read it and go, my God, you're right, let's do this immediately.
And writers, do you engage with writers and pay writers to develop?
Yeah, that's in general what we tend to do is, because at Big Talk we're an independent company, we're a large independent. I mean, Big Talk's a company that makes, we make Rev and Friday Night Dinner and Him and Her and things like Our Zeus. It's a big indie in the independent world. But no one has the resources to pay for dozens and dozens of scripts. So generally our job is to get a writer and say to them, what do you want to do? Let's talk about it. Let's work the idea up into a point where we can then pitch it without a script necessarily, sometimes with a script that they've written on spec or some pages, and pitch that to a commissioner and say, do you buy into this vision with us? And if they do, then they'll pay for a script, and then we pay the writer, and then hopefully you'll make a pilot or go straight to series, whatever happens.
Okay, there's a question there.
My question actually kind of ties into the end of the last one.
Brilliant.
In terms of the net and so on.
Okay.
Well, we're going to come to digital a bit later.
Are we?
Oh,
yeah.
oh, okay, cool.
Oh,
well, the one thing I was actually just going to kind of refer to is you were saying earlier about the complications that come with sitcom television. Oh, not sitcom, sorry, sketch show television.
Yeah.
Sort of online video and things like, the kind of 5-minute short style of thing kind of opens up a little bit, that kind of avenue a little more for sketch shows. And I was wondering just what kind of changes are you seeing after being in the industry for a while? What kind of changes are you seeing with kind of online videos and things like your streaming services? Or what are you kind of seeing changing now?
Okay, well, I'm honestly gonna come to the web,
okay,
just
cool.
not now, because we're gonna do some old-fashioned analogy type stuff first. Thanks
for the question. That's really complicated and difficult to answer.
That's right. That's why we're gonna make you go there.
So I'm not going to. No, I will do.
Sticking with the reason I want to do this is sticking with commissioning. So
sure.
Dirk Gently.
Yeah.
How long did this take you to get over the line?
Oh God. So about I can't remember what year it was, but 2000. I was having a meeting with a writer called Howard Overman, who wrote Misfits and a lot of Merlin and some other things, and he's a really hugely successful writer. But this is sort of before he did any of that. And we were talking about detective shows and why we were both slightly cross there hadn't been a funny detective show. And we both said, we're both big fans of the Douglas Adams book, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And he said, well, it's unadaptable. And I said, I know, but if you took the character out, then maybe. So I went off to do something else, and then just thought, well, actually, let's look into the rights, and they were available. And they were hugely complicated to get because they were part owned by the Douglas Adams estate, and they're controlled by a huge agency in the States called CAA. So we took about a year to do a deal to get the rights, and with a very nice man called Chris Carey, who was a producer in the department at the time. And we finally got the rights. So this process has now taken 2 years to get to here. Then we had to work out who was going to write it. Obviously, we went back to Howard and said, would you like to write it? He was in the middle of writing Misfits, so he wasn't available. So we then had to wait another 8 months. Eventually sold the, I can't remember if we commissioned a script or whether I sold the idea into the BBC. I think I went into BBC Drama, because it felt like a drama rather than a comedy, and said, do you like this idea? Yes, we do. Do you like Howard? Yes, we do. Will you pay for a script? Fine. I think that's what happened, but maybe we pay for the script. Howard wrote the script, which took another few months. By this time, it's, 3-4 years since we had the original idea. It then sat at the BBC, as things sometimes do, for about 18 months with regular nagging and various other things. So I think about 18 months later, a very nice woman called Eleanor Moran sort of pushed it through with a guy called Piers Wenger, who now runs drama at Channel 4, and Ben Stevenson, who's in charge of drama at the BBC, really liked it. So we got to make a pilot, got to make a one-off. That took another year, and then didn't transmit for another. So by this point, it's taken about 6 years to get what started off as a simple conversation through the various wrangles to get something onto screen. The pilot did really well. Was very positively reviewed, and we won a couple of awards, and they then commissioned a series for BBC 4, which at the time was embarking on quite an ambitious plan to do more drama. We made the series, having cast it with Steve Mangan and Darren Boyd and some other brilliant people. Made the show for BBC 4, which promptly then decided it wasn't going to make any more drama, and it didn't have any more money. So having made one series and everyone being keen to do more, suddenly the channel we were making it for didn't have any money. And so all that work for basically 7 years of effort ended up being 4, I think, rather good hours of stuff, which...
You want to introduce the clip?
Yeah, so this clip, I can't remember what happens in this clip, but Dirk Gently is this guy here, is what he calls a holistic detective. Which is basically a chancer. He's a bullshitter and a chancer who is just often right, sort of almost by luck, more by luck than judgment. And that's Steve's character. And he's always in debt and always on the run from something or someone, and the police hate him. And his sidekick, who works with him, is a guy called Richard, who he met in the pilot, who's played by Darren Boyd. They met in the pilot, and basically Richard was having a midlife crisis and decided he was going to leave his boring office job and become a private detective, but it hasn't turned out the way he thought it would be because Dirk turns out to be a bullshitter. And I can't remember exactly what's happening in this clip, but there you go, there's a clip.
I mean, most people will go to a wine bar to meet women, or a nightclub.
I'm not most people.
Oh, I know that. I found your list. Handwriting traits for the perfect woman.
I do have a very specific set of needs.
Yeah, no, I see that. Gullibility. Bad with finances. To be honest, it sounds more like the perfect mark for you to fleece.
Well, I will confess that when I formulated this project, I was a little more mercenary, but now I've met Miss Fulston in the flesh.
Do you fancy her?
She does have certain physical and facial characteristics that evolution has deemed to be more alluring to prospective mates, yes.
Maybe don't say it exactly like that on a date.
Hurry up, Macduff.
How did you even find her, anyway? Her handwriting, I mean.
An old client owed me a favour. He lent me a pile of handwritten claim forms from his car insurance company, his ladies-only insurance company.
Clever. And very, very creepy.
Oh, come, Macduff. Once I'm safe on some beach in Puerto Rico, you can tell Miss Fulston without a word of a lie. Then a stalker has left the country. OK, passport.
Wow. Police really tore this place apart, didn't they?
I'm afraid not, Macduff. That minor disagreement with my cleaner has escalated somewhat. Look in the...
You know how smooth your life would run if you just paid people occasionally?
Oh, Macduff, the situation has gone way beyond mere money. I haven't paid it for a year. Most people would have quit by now, but not Elena. Oh, no. She's Eastern European, hardy, probably distantly related to the Borgias. She continues to come here for 2 hours every day, stubbornly avoiding doing anything resembling actual cleaning. In retaliation, I have, of course, become messier and messier. It's like a surreal horror movie for OCD sufferers, with Elena as the vampiric witch of the piece. But she's got a heart of gold, really. Salt of the earth. Lovely woman.
I know.
Recently, things have taken a much darker turn. Every day, she places that rug in that exact position. It is a warning, Macduff.
Plainly. Yeah, it's terrifying.
Pick it up.
Oh, that is dark. She sawed a hole in your floor.
No, the hole's there already. It was a memento of a previous dispute with the plumber, if you remember.
Sensing a theme here, Dirk?
Oh, sure it was around here somewhere. Detective Inspector Jilks! And you found my passport.
That episode was written by a guy called Jamie Matheson, who wrote a couple of episodes of this series of Doctor Who. I think he wrote the one with the flat. Has anyone watched Doctor Who? He wrote the one with the flat people and then the one with the mummy on the Orient Express. And he's doing pretty well, Jamie, and with Howard as well. So yeah, it's good. It's a fun idea, that.
Let's take another question from the floor.
You talked about a bit about the American system of putting together teams to write comedy. I wonder why we don't do it so much in
it's
the
all
UK,
money.
even when we've got successes.
Yeah, if you make a hugely successful American sitcom. Okay, so the budget on an American sitcom is probably between £1 million and £1.5 million per episode, and we spend that on an entire series of 6. They spend 20%-ish of their budget on their writing staff. That would be an entire episode budget, pretty much, for us. And the reason they can afford to spend that is partly because their advertising dollars are huge, but also because the upside to a hugely successful sitcom is massive. You know, the writers of Friends split $1.5 billion between them. And at that level of numbers, you can afford to spend money to try and, you know, in the R&D stage of development and putting together teams and putting together staffs, because once you have that level of volume in the States, you can sell it into syndication, which means it goes off the main networks and off into local affiliates, and they pay a huge amount of money for that. You start making a huge amount of money from advertising dollars, which we don't necessarily make here. You know, the ancillary revenues on those shows are vast. So it's all money. We would do more team writing here if we had bigger budgets, but we can't have bigger budgets because the industry doesn't cope with it. But we are trying to find ways of doing it.
The other thing is they have much longer runs. So they will do 2 seasons every year. They'll do 22 eps or 12 hours, 11 or 12 hours per season. And they've optioned everybody. I mean, I think the Modern Family cast have only just come out of their original contracts that they signed at the time of the pilot. You don't get commissioners who are prepared to allow you to engage.
But that's
people.
Chicken and egg, because you can do that because you've got a team who can generate that much material. We can't do longer runs here because it'd be impossible to ask a writer
but the commissioners don't want them either. The channel environment, Sky maybe.
But they'll take them if they could afford them, but they can't afford them because they cost more to generate that much money. It's actually not, the economies of scale are not greater. I mean, you very kindly, when Pat was my boss at the BBC, we did quite a lot of work on trying to look at the economics of it, and they just don't, at the moment, they don't stack up without someone, a channel or a huge distributor with pots of cash, taking a massive punt, and it would take us years to get to the level.
There's a really interesting question to pick up in the drama session as well, because this will come up in drama. Sure. And if you look at UK television, Sky does it with like Strike Back, but you get very few of these 10, 12-part series. There's a lady there, sorry, just one row back from where it was just now, and then there's a lady over here.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I've been in the UK now for 13 years and I'm African. Is there room for cultural diversity in comedy in TV? I haven't seen a lot of it.
What an excellent question.
But then there is, the cultural diversity is increasing, but there's none of it shown on TV.
That's an excellent question, and that's a very good point, and you're entirely correct. The lack of cultural diversity in comedy on television is a shambles, and we all know that, and all of us working in the business know that, and we all shuffle around and stare at our feet when people mention it. There are 2 reasons why it's a bit of a shambles. One is that just morally that's just wrong, But from a purely economic point of view, there's a huge audience out there that we're not necessarily catering for. There is an argument, and it's a similar argument when it comes to, I don't know, say you're trying to hire a funny Asian actor. The pool of Asian actors is very small, and the tiny pool of funny Asian actors is tiny, just because there are fewer Asian people in the country, blah, 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 blah. But also, it's just not necessarily a profession that a lot of people go into. But that's a circular argument, because if you don't have funny Asian people on the telly, the more young Asian men and women won't want to go into the profession. And so, you know, we have to get over the fact that we can't throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, well, it's because we don't have a pool of talent to choose from. We suffer from there not being enough people on either side of the camera from different cultural backgrounds who want to engage with comedy or drama. And that's not their fault, that's our fault for not going out and engaging with them. And we are aware of that. There are things happening. There are lots of brilliant charities. I'm on the board of one called Creative Access, but there are other really good charities and organisations who are trying to work to change this. It's slightly sad that we have to resort to doing that kind of thing, but there aren't nearly enough producers of African backgrounds or of Chinese backgrounds or whatever. And actually, if you're not engaged in that world, it's very hard to engage the audience that would watch those shows. So there is room for it. There should be more of it. I wish there was more of it. We are actively trying to do something about it. If anyone has any good ideas, they would be more than welcome.
And I mean, the other key thing is commissioning. Commissioning is also not very diverse. So even if you told a good joke from a diverse background, the person catching it may not understand it, and therefore it doesn't get.
But they're engaged with this process as well. We're all in it, but we're not
moving
Pat's
quick
right.
enough.
No, absolutely, Pat's right.
And digital has a role to play in this, and we'll pick that up in the digital discussion that you're not looking forward to. Good. Lady there.
Hi, I'm from the National Film and Television School, and currently I'm working on a comedy panel show. So I want to know from, So, you know, shopping around for commissioners and places who could be and would be interested in it is a little bit difficult because, you know, it's almost like the timing has to be right. And, like, I just wanted to know from you exactly how, you know, to perceive, like, comedy panel shows in, you know, which channel to look at and how to go about putting it out there, basically.
It's a tricky question to answer. I mean, all television is cyclical. You'll have no detective shows on telly, and then you'll have 1,000, and then you'll have no sketch shows, and then there'll be 30, and you know the studio audience sitcom was dead 10 years ago, and suddenly there's loads of them. And part of the reason for that is that we're a little bit sheep-like. All of us in television, and we'll all throw our hands up and admit it, is if thing A works, there's a rush to do more thing A, and then everyone gets bored of it, so they go, oh, thing B's worked, let's do that. So I think the issue with panel shows, and someone who knows more about panel shows than I do will probably be able to answer this better, is that there's a bit of a glut of them at the moment, in that the shows that have worked and were brilliant, Mock the Week, Have I Got News, 8 out of 10 Cats, Buzzcocks, those shows that worked and worked really well, suddenly the market was saturated with about 15 others, QI, which is brilliant, and loads of other shows suddenly turned up. And at that point, the audience, they all start to merge into one, and they're all doing the same joke because there's no point of difference between them anymore. And it's very hard for an audience to think, actually, I must watch that show that's very different to all the others, but because it isn't. So I think audiences, and then as an extension to that, commissioners and channels have fallen out of love with them. Now, the thing about panel shows is they're a gold dust for a television production company and for a channel because they're completely repeatable. They're like a 10-part series. If you're a channel controller and you can ink in, right, I've got 2 series of Never Mind the Buzzcocks next year, brilliant, tick. Then that's hours of television that you've just already, at the beginning of the year, you can say, right, I don't have to look for that. I know they can deliver it. There's a team of writers, it's fine. So they love them. I just think at the moment everyone's in a place where they think, yeah, but it's got to be very different in order to work, because at the moment the audience isn't quite buying it. And I think it's, you know, an indicator of that is, I think Would I Lie to You is one of the best shows on television. It's beautifully put together, brilliantly funny, amazingly cast, but isn't quite getting the viewing figures it deserves because the public's probably a bit bored of panel shows. and that's sad for that show. So I haven't really answered your question, but I think that's because it's not really possible to answer it. I think panel shows are in a bit of a dip. At some point they will go up. Everyone wants them, everyone needs them, so you just have to be lucky in your timing and find the right person on the right day who can say, actually, you know what, that is what I'm looking for today, that's what my channel needs. That was a really long answer to a simple
No. I mean, sometimes the talent can make a difference. If you've got a talent that could be a channel-defining talent, that may help.
That's what happened with They Think It's... with... What's the show on Sky called?
Yeah,
League of Their Own.
Yeah.
Which is a huge hit for Sky, but it was just a brilliant match of James Corden's talent and Flintoff and Bishop and Redknapp and all those people that were involved. They all sort of were the right people in the right place. It felt right for Sky and has been a colossal hit. That show's huge on Sky. And it's a very well-made show as well. It's not a panel show anymore. It's just, it's sort of, they only do 2 questions. And it's just basically arsing about for half an hour, which is
the other
brilliant.
thing is to look what's on the channels before you go in and make sure you know what they've already got.
Sure.
And make sure you can explain why your show is different to what they've already got.
Yeah, it's no use pitching Mock the Week because it already exists.
We're going to move on to clip number 4.
I can't remember what this is.
The Life of Rock with Brian Pern.
Yeah. Okay, so this is what I've tried to do is show clips that have a point. I can't remember what the point of this one was, apart from this is this started online. Look, digital. This started online as Rhys Thomas is a really smart writer, and I were working on a pilot, and he came to for something else, and he came to me with this idea and says, "Look, we're obsessed with various certain rock stars, some of whom may or may not be Peter Gabriel. You're too young to know who Peter Gabriel is." Have this weird online presence where they do video blogs of their life, but because they're sort of multi-millionaire rock stars and are slightly detached from the world, they're all a bit weird. So we watched a few of these and thought this was funny. So we did, for the BBC's comedy website, made 10, I think, maybe more, little 5-minute clips of Simon Day from The Fast Show and various other things playing this aging, not quite aging, middle-aged rock star and going through his daily life, and that was fun. That we thought that would be the end of it, and then BBC 4 started to have a lot of success with. We made those for not very much money, because the thing about working online is there's not much money in it. So we made shows on a very tiny crew. I was pretty much shooting it. Rhys and I directed it together. Neither of us, he's now a very successful director of documentaries, but I don't know what I'm doing. So we cobbled it together and it was fun. Then BBC 4 had lots of success with rock documentaries, so we thought we could take that character and do it on a slightly bigger budget for BBC 4 and make a spoof rock documentary. So we made these 3 shows called The Life of Rock with Brian Pern being the name of the character. And Brian, we created this big backstory for Brian where he was in a band called Thoch, who were a big band in the 70s, slightly similar to Genesis, maybe exactly the same as Genesis, who you also won't have heard of. So this documentary was like a retrospective of this fictional career, and we cobbled together a whole bunch of DJs and other people to do talking heads as if this was a real band. So this clip is, I think, a bit where they start to discuss. And you'll see that what we did was, Rhys is a very accomplished documentary maker. He made a brilliant thing about Freddie Mercury and a brilliant thing about Queen. And so we put this together in the style of those BBC 4 music documentaries. And what's really interesting about this is I remember I talked to a music documentary producer after this had gone out who said, you realise that we have meetings now where things are suggested and we say we can't do that, it's a bit Brian Pern, that we'd ruined their entire profession,
created a new word.
Which was gratifying. Anyway, it did really well on BBC 4. They've commissioned a second series which is on BBC 2. I'm not at the BBC anymore. I left to join Big Talks, so I'm not involved in the second series as much. But the second series is going out at Christmas on BBC 2, which you should look out for, which is good. Anyway, this is a little clip.
And then, of course, there was Thoch. 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 Thoch.
The Thoch. Thoch.
Thoch. Thoch.
Thoch. Yes, I'd agree. Thoch.
Thoch.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Angleseas Pavilion. While we're just tuning up between songs, I'd like to introduce you Thoch, the band. First of all, on double neck guitar, Mr. Pat Quid. I was very unfortunate in that I was born to very wealthy and very loving parents, and I never wanted for anything, and I think that's held me back. I wish, to some extent, that I'd had a more difficult upbringing, involving abuse, lack of love, and penury.
On bass, we have John. On drums, we have Dave, Mike.
Whilst at Stoke, I had the good fortune to meet two chaps who'd had a similar misfortune as I'd had growing up, in that they both had unconditional love and wanted for nothing financially, and that was Brian Pern and Tony Peble, or Pebble as he was then.
And on keyboards, we have Mr. Tony Peble.
It's Peble with an acute, Huguenot, 16th century Protestant France. Doesn't matter, bollocks. Anyway, it's Peble. I remember going to Putney to see the Yardbirds and Long John Baldry. And you just couldn't move for twat, I don't remember anything about the music. I just remember all those beautiful birds. So I went home and I started practicing.
We came, we saw, we hid, we shook, we were afraid of what we didn't know.
Well, Thoch was always complicated. I mean, we were part of a wave of public school bands. That's a bit embarrassing still. And we wrote about our environment, which was largely bucolic, pastoral, dark side.
We ran, we flew, we danced, we laughed, we cried, we joked, we moaned.
The pretentiousness of that band, yeah, used to make me want to, I can't even say.
Lovely. Vic and Bob did this amazing cameo as Mulligan and O'Hare, these great characters they used to do in their sketch show. And they were the only people we didn't script. Actually, we didn't script Matt Lucas either, who played a music producer. And we just shot them rambling on for an entire afternoon. I don't know when I've laughed so much. They were utterly brilliant. What's great about that show, apart from the appearance of Mike UKIP Calypso Reed, I'd forgotten about him, was how the music industry really bought into this send-up of themselves. And when we sent them up even further, the more we sent them up, the more they loved it. And I think there was a general feeling that they knew they were all taking themselves far too seriously. So it was really entertaining. What's brilliant though is the character of Brian Pern, you see at the front there, who's the front man, which is Simon Day. I didn't have a clip of the stuff of him in the modern day, which is most of the show. We based him a little bit quite a lot on Peter Gabriel, who was lead singer of Genesis and blah, 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 blah. Hugely successful man. And we showed the online stuff to Peter Gabriel, who loved it so much, and his family loved it, that when we were making the series, we said, look, we're doing it. And he said, I'll be in it if you want. So we got him in it at the end. And when we sent the series, he said, look, I'm not necessarily enjoying being sent up, but my kids think it's the funniest thing they've ever seen. So, there was a real warmth to it. Anyway, what was interesting about that was it started digitally on not very much money, that someone identified that there was something in it, and it got moved into the arena where there was more money, which is the BBC 4, which has marginally more money than online, but it's still more money, which allowed us to do things like recreate 1975 at Anglesey and go and shoot all those talking heads, none of which we'd have been able to afford to do on a digital budget because there's not a huge amount of money online. That will obviously change, and from a content point of view, there will be a day when you make something digitally and that will be the end rather than the means to an end.
So let's just stick with digital because we've had a few questions. Citizen Khan also started out online as a character during the general election. I think it was before you joined, and then it went to radio, and then it went to... Do you scout online for new talent on new formats?
Yeah, we do. We made a pilot earlier this year, which didn't quite work out the way we wanted, but it was interesting, with a smart guy called Jazzy Zonzolo, who we found online. We made I commissioned a script when I was at the BBC, which I've since left behind. I hope it's doing well, with a guy called Hamza Arshad, who we found online. We talked to quite a few people who work in the online arena. What's interesting at the moment is that to be successful online requires, it's like the difference between a novelist and someone who writes for theatre and somebody who writes for television. They're different fields. So being a brilliant novelist doesn't mean you're a great screenwriter. Being a great theatrical actor doesn't necessarily mean you can act on television. And doing great online content doesn't necessarily translate or transfer to long form. The skill sets are different. And at a time when the money, and I don't mean profits, I mean the ability to do things, is much more in the analogue world still. It's not. It's sometimes not necessarily straightforward to translate what people do in tiny 5-minute chunks, a lot of which rely on charisma. They don't necessarily have the same writing rigour or the same structures. That translation is not always straightforward. What I think is interesting about it is that we are all aware that the financial advantage that we have to be able to do things in the way we do will melt away, in the same way that in the music industry in 10,
so what
15 years ago.
Television is going to be squeezed and squeezed and squeezed.
What will happen in the music business, as you know, the record companies held sway for years because they had access to the studios that you needed in order to make decent music. You can now make it on your laptop in your bedroom without resource. So the big advantage that the music companies had is gone. We, in the television business, still have that big advantage, but that won't last forever. You will be able to make broadcast quality. You already can make broadcast quality stuff with an iPhone, or other phones are available. You can do it anyway, so you can do that without our resources.
And the internet means you can broadcast it to
and
everyone.
The internet means you can broadcast it.
So now you're at Big Talk, which
we
is
will
an
be
indie.
redundant. Sorry, but it means that large chunks of what we do will be redundant. What won't be redundant is the storytelling skills that we have and our ability to be able to translate what is amazing raw material. I don't know what that gesture is either. Raw material into something that is digestible by a large audience, and that's a skill set that you'd think that we have. We just need to be sure that we're not all constantly trying to apply that to, trying to put a square peg in a round hole by saying, right, you're good at this, so do this.
So you've been at the Cash Trap BBC, now you're at a large indie. Any difference in digital approach? Any difference in how they look at digital or the role that digital plays?
Yeah, it's very different, but it's not. I think that they're approaching the same thing via different routes. At the BBC, they're very keen to engage in digital because the BBC has a responsibility to be engaging with everything new and being part of every movement, every new innovation that comes along, because that's their duty. As you know, you were in charge there. At an indie, you're chasing the money, and that sounds again very mercenary, but that's, if we all wanted to make lots of money, we'd all go and work in the city. So it's not that, we're not all hideously mercenary, but you have to be able to fund your company, you have to be able to pay people's salaries, and in order to do that, you need to go where the talent is, and the talent will always attract viewers because that's where money is. So we have to be engaged with that. It's not like the BBC, which is engaged because there's some kind of civic duty to do so. We have to do it, or we'll all go bankrupt and all become redundant, and we can't do that. And it's the same reason why we engage with audiences from different cultures, because if we don't engage those people, I sounded like me, us and them, if we don't engage everyone, then the people that we're not engaging will just not bother watching us, and we won't have any money and we'll go bankrupt. So we can't afford to do it. So we're really heavily engaged.
I want to leave time for, we got a sneak preview of your next project, so I want to leave time for that. We've got time for a few more questions.
As many as you want, I'm here all day.
Hi, I just want to preface this question by saying I've asked this at a few other masterclasses.
Oh, good.
And you seem
Must be a good question then.
Are you going to judge my answer against the others?
Well, I just want to say,
I like being judged.
Before I do, it's about kind of getting a firm foothold in the industry.
Yeah.
Because I ask this question a lot, and you seem to get the same repetitive answer, but it seems to be a bit outdated because they seem to give the same reason, just go off and start and just put your stuff out there and all this sort of thing. But for a lot of young people today, getting into industry is very different from how it was just 5 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So my thing, this is specifically to do with writing, and because we don't have the same system in America where they have large writing teams, so it's very easy to join as a writing assistant or something along those lines. While here it seems like if you don't seem to have a name backing you, it's very, very hard to get into any sort of writing clique or get a producer to work with you and to develop you, because I've sent script in to commissioners and stuff, and they said it's a very great script. If you can get a producer to help you develop it, then we'll be interested. But then when you go to producers and they don't recognize your name, or you don't have you haven't worked on big enough shows because they can't hire any extra writers, it's very hard to get any attention, really. So I was just wondering how, for new writers, how to go about getting attention, getting producers to back you, getting more people to support you.
It's not easy. I completely acknowledge that. And the routes into being a writer are not as organised or structured as they are in the States. But the thing about being a writer is you can just do it. You need a laptop, that's all you need. A laptop and internet access. And you can be a writer while you're doing whatever you're doing to earn money. You can just do it. The bottom line is that all production companies read scripts. They might say they don't take unsolicited scripts, but if something comes in and it's got a note on the top that says, oh, by the way, I've sent this to so-and-so, then we're more likely to look at it. Everyone's always looking for the next thing. No one is sitting there looking for a name. What they want is the next big thing. We're all engaged with that because that's where our income comes from. That's where our salaries come from. On top of that, the answer, just keep doing and sending it in, is quite outdated because you can make this stuff now. And actually, if someone sends me an email saying, I've made this thing online, here's a link, which I've put together on a laptop with software that costs 50 quid, and I've made it on an iPhone, I'm more likely to look at that than I am to read a script, just because it's just there. I can click it. I don't have to spend time reading the script. It's a slightly different thing, and I've got a huge backlog of scripts from agents that I haven't got my way through, but I don't get sent a lot of links. And I think in the modern day, when you can do this by yourself, really straightforwardly, there's sort of no reason not to. I think, and I don't mean to put down the problem. I know that it's an issue for all young writers starting.
It's tough. I mean, there are more graduates in media studies every year than there are jobs in the industry. So there's always going to be pressure to get in. I would say look at BBC Writers' Room. They do take unsolicited scripts and give you feedback. Amazon, studios.amazon.com. Amazon actually has a website where you can submit your script, and within 45 days they'll tell you if they want to option it or pass. As Saurabh said, try and identify those indies that have a background of working with new writers, because they're probably set up to actually take a lot of unsolicited material and give you help and support. And then also turn your idea into video. Samuel Benter, some of you may know, Living with the Mackenzies. If you don't, you should check it out online. I met Samuel when I talked to him about it. He did the first series, which was 8 3-minute films, 5-minute films for nothing. Blagged a camera, blagged some actors, blagged a room to shoot it in, edited it himself. He then got £10,000 and he did a second series. And so it's very good, and that's a great showcase for his material. And on Facebook, he tells me that a major studio now wants to talk to him about it. Well, I'm afraid we've run up against time.
There was one other
question.
There's one
other question which we'll take, and then if we can play out with the last,
hand up quite
with the preview.
Yes.
Wait for the mic, sorry.
Hello. I'm studying script development, and
Great.
I just started at the RTS, and I'm a bit confused about how you go into these roles. People have a lot of different advice. You've got to go in through production. You should start running. Development assistant roles don't seem to be advertised.
No,
it's just always an in-house thing.
It's a problem, and we know that. I think, most indies particularly run on very small teams, and the structure or organisation in the industry that one would need to be able to say, right, this is where I come in, this is my entry-level position, this is my second position, those things don't exist. And maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, I don't know. Maybe being more like a law firm would make it a less creative industry, I don't know. But you're correct, they don't come up very often. It is a case of being in the right place at the right time, which unfortunately means persistent. being persistent and being a thorn in people's sides and constantly saying, have you got an issue, if you've got a development assistant position coming up, is this coming up or is that coming up? Because one day the answer will be yes. In the meantime, sometimes just getting into a company in whatever way you can is the best way to do it, which is running or doing whatever else you're doing, and then being in the ear of someone like me or my equivalent in other companies saying, I want to do this. Because at some point we will listen and just go, all right, well then have a go at doing this for a bit and let's see what you're like. It's not straightforward. It isn't. I wish it was. I wish it was a bit more organised. It isn't. I think we'd like to be a bit more, I mean, we're a very organised indie, and actually they have a very well-constructed recruitment programme, and some other indies are, but some of them aren't, and actually the vast majority of television isn't particularly well organised for picking up people at ground level and building them up.
I would say just get in anywhere you can. Jane Tranter, who was the most powerful woman in British drama, started as a secretary at the BBC.
Lots of people start in, very unprepossessing positions.
Okay. So I'm getting the guillotine, which means we've run out of time.
Oh, okay.
Saurabh, can a round of applause for Saurabh, please, everybody?